So, you bought a camera. You're so excited to take it out of the box, open it up, and start using it. But then you look down and you think to yourself, how do I work this thing? Well, today we're going to talk about that. Let's go. Today we're going to go over 3 basic functions or tools on how to master your camera on your first day. Now, the first thing that you really need to understand to know your camera is to know exposure. Exposure is the key component to, well, crafting an image. So we're going to go over the exposure triangle. This triangle consists of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now let's go over that very briefly. Shutter speed has 2 main things to go with it. Shutter speed allows you to let the shutter open for a certain amount of time. It is the literal speed of the shutter opening and closing. This affects how much light is let in a certain amount of time. This can be measured in fractions of a second. It can be 1/100th speed of a second, which means that the shutter is pretty fast. Anything above 100th of a second is really, really fast. Now, it could also be let open even longer, like 1/24th of a second, which lets in a lot of light. You could shoot at a longer shutter speed to have a longer exposure. Or you could shoot at a shorter shutter speed or a faster shutter speed to have a shorter exposure. That is shutter speed. The second part of the triangle is aperture. Aperture has also 2 functions. It is basically the eye of the camera. It's what allows the light to come in towards the sensor. It either opens up really wide or it stops down really small. And that's how you can control light coming in through your lens. This is not part of the camera, this is part of the lens. Now, this is also going to create something else called depth of field. And depth of field is what can make or break an image to become more cinematic or not. If you want something to be very cinematic, it has to have what they call a shallow depth of field. This is where your subject is separated from the background. So for instance, if you shoot at a 1.8, your background will be very blurry. However, if you shoot at a 2.8 or even an f4, more things will be in focus. The third and final piece of the exposure triangle is ISO. ISO also has 2 functions to it. It is what they call fake light. And this fake light creates this extra light that comes from nowhere. It's light produced by your camera, artificially. If you're in a situation where you have no professional lighting, then you may want to bump up your ISO. The times that you want to use this is when you can use it sparingly. Now, there are certain cameras out there that I know of that can shoot at very high ISOs, which is fantastic. But the one downside of ISO is the more you add, the more grain and noise you add to the image. Grain and noise can be a stylistic approach to a film or a photo. However, you don't want that initially baked into the image if you can't take it out. Always shoot at a lower ISO to have a cleaner image. Now, we may go over the exposure triangle in another video, or each part of the triangle may have its own video in an upcoming series on this channel. So if you want, subscribe for more, so that way you can continue to learn more about exposure. The next tip that I'm going to give you on when you have your camera is pretty simple. Do your research. Look up what other people are saying about the camera that you bought. Are there good reviews? Are there bad reviews? This is something that you probably should have done before you bought the camera, but in case you didn't, do some research and watch videos on people reviewing your camera, because that's how you'll learn what's the good things about it and what's the bad things. That doesn't mean that your camera is probably bad or good. It just means that maybe there are certain things that you may not be able to achieve, but that's okay. If you're first starting out, you don't need the best camera out there. You just need something to get the job done. So when you're doing your initial research, figure out what camera fits in your budget and allows you to get exactly what you're looking for. You don't always need a camera that's $30,000, but you will never use all the functions on it. Maybe you just need a $700 camera and that does everything you need. So do your research. The third and final tip is another simpler one, but I still feel that it needs to be said because it sometimes is just neglected. And that's to figure out what buttons do what on your camera. Sometimes when you're out in the field, you want to be as efficient as possible, and knowing where those buttons are on your camera and what they do will make you better at your job. It'll make you quicker, and really the only thing you'll be focused on is getting the shot. And if you're able to figure out where all your buttons are, customize them however you want. Some cameras allow you to put custom buttons on your camera. Either way, figure out what buttons do what, and that will make you a better photographer or a better filmmaker when you're actually in the field. Now, you also want to learn a little bit about color profiles. All cameras have a color profile. They have a built-in normal color profile that comes straight out of the box. And most of the time, that'll do the job. Some cameras may not be as good as others, and that's okay. You can always tweak that just a little bit in editing. If there's an option on your camera to shoot in a log format or a log profile, then shoot in that. That is a flat color profile that will give you the most dynamic range, which basically just means as much information as possible to work with. This is also said in the photo community as raw shooting. RAW can also be shot in video, but those are on the more higher end cameras, which if you're just starting out, you may not have just yet. You always want to shoot in a log or RAW format, so that way you get the flattest image profile, so that way when you take it into editing, and you're color correcting and you're color editing, you have as much range as possible. That's all I have for you today. I hope that this helped you in some way. I hope that for those of you who are starting out as filmmakers or photographers and trying to learn about your cameras, this video gives you some sort of information or some sort of base to figuring out your camera. It's okay if you still don't get it on the first day, and honestly, I don't expect you to get it on the first day. The best way to master your camera is not in a day. It takes time. So go out there, use your camera as much as possible, and learn. If this helped you in any way, feel free to give this video a like, so that way YouTube can send it out to other people who are starting out as filmmakers and photographers. Subscribe if you want to see a series of this exposure triangle and really understanding how exposure works, because I know when I started, I knew nothing, and now I'm learning more, and I want to take you along and show you what I've learned. Feel free to stick around for that. Other than that, for now, I'll just say goodbye, and thank you.